On both sides pointing that we are seeing momentum ahead of the APEC meeting.
It certainly seems that both China and the US are looking at that date, November 16th and 17th in Chile at the APEC summit, to sign this deal. And both sides have really dovetailed in terms of their messaging on how much progress has been made for this phase one part of the deal. As you say, we heard Trump speaking effusively, really, about the progress that is being made, saying they are ahead of schedule. And as you also mentioned, this comes, of course, and followed the comments that we had from China on Saturday, saying that the text for the part one part of this deal was essentially complete, particularly around regulatory standards on things like agriculture. And that comment on Saturday, that statement on Saturday, followed a phone call between Lighthizer and Mnuchin on the US side and Chinese Vice Premier Liu He on Friday as well. So it does seem to be that there is momentum. And of course, phase one of the deal, the US officials are also saying, as well as those agricultural purchases, so China buying and committing to buy agricultural products to levels before the trade war kicked off, so 2017 levels. As well as that, there's also going to be commitments from the Chinese on intellectual property, of course, and also the currency in exchange for a pause on these tariffs from the US side. Now, of course, our own reporting suggests that China is also pushing for removal of tariffs, so they want to get that $40 to $50 billion number in terms of ag purchases. That is still unresolved, it seems, but it seems in other respects that the two sides are fairly aligned. Of course, the big question is whether or not phase two will ever come to bear. And that will involve, of course, a focus on industrial policy and state subsidies. Big question marks about how much more progress can be made after this initial phase one deal is signed, if indeed it does get signed at that November summit.
And Tom, even as we see progress in these trade talks, a push to limit U.S. pension fund exposure to Chinese companies continues. What do we know at this point?
Well, this is a real reminder that across the board, really, a bipartisan push in the US, particularly from those lawmakers in Washington, continues on a number of fronts, whether it's national security or human rights. And so this is the news that Marco Rubio, of course, the Florida senator, is suggesting that he's going to push forward a bill to restrict the access of US pensions to Chinese equities, because you have the example of the Federal Retirement Thrift Investment Fund, which is valued at about $50 billion US. The chair and the board of that fund is considering allowing that pension pot to be invested in part of and to reflect the MSCI All Country World ex-US Index, which of course includes China. Now, they say that that is about diversifying their portfolio and reducing their risk. Marco Rubio and others say that what essentially you're allowing is for US federal officials and their pensions to fund, as he says, the Communist Party of China. So he may be penciling a bill. He has to find other co-signatories. But again, it's a reminder that the push to potentially reduce US investment flows towards Chinese equities is still in focus. And we know that the White House and the Trump administration are discussing these issues. And of course, it follows the blacklisting of those 8 Chinese companies over human rights abuses. So it's another reminder that in terms of these issues, human rights, national security, beyond trade, are still firmly in focus for lawmakers in Washington.
And how much are these issues in focus when it comes to the Communist Party plenum that's ongoing this week?
Well, the focus really at the plenum, which is the gathering of about 200 of the most powerful Communist Party officials in Beijing and runs from the beginning of this week through to Thursday, the focus really, we believe, is going to be on politics rather than the trade war and economics. But, of course, those issues will come up inevitably because they are linked. And what we're hearing is that President Xi, and what we believe is that President Xi and his team will be pushing for greater control of the Communist Party across all sectors of society here to ensure that the Communist Party itself is strengthened and continues to be, quote unquote, rejuvenated so that it can control the people of China more effectively. Again, with President Xi, quote unquote, at its core. That is going to be the focus. It's all about politics and the role of the Communist Party and strengthening the role of the Communist Party. But of course, economics and trade, you would imagine, will be discussed. We'll get details on the back of that plenum and that meeting of Communist Party officials, the Central Committee, on Thursday, likely when the state media gives its first report on what has been discussed here in Beijing.